Good evening, everyone. Welcome again to our next session of our NetTalks. As mentioned in the past, NetTalks are a series of events where we try and discuss different topics that are happening between Tanzania and Germany, mostly in Tanzania, where we tackle different topics. The NetTalks are brought to you by or organized by Tanzania Network, and Tanzania Network is an organization which is based in Germany that deals with different issues between Tanzania and Germany. We enable also fostering partnerships between the different organizations or institutions between Tanzania and Germany, as well as building networks or any kind of issues that need to be clarified from both perspectives. Yeah, the topic we organized for you today is the Tanzanian energy sector. So we see with the increasing demands of energy, of course, there's also different challenges that are facing this sector, as well as in Tanzania. We saw recently the shortages of water, which is causing the shortage of hydropower, which is more or less the main source, one of the main sources of energy supply or electricity supply in Tanzania. And yeah, so to discuss this issue, what needs to be done, what challenges are there, where Tanzania is coming from in this sector, I have two guests or two experts in this field. So I'll begin with Emma Laswai, who is from TAREA. So welcome, Emma.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. I'm Emma Laswai, working from Tanzania Renewable Energy Association, based in Tanzania, Dar es Salaam. I am the Deputy Executive Secretary. I've been working with the organization for 8 years now. And I have a background in environmental sciences and management, bachelor degree, master's in environmental and natural resource economics. And as for you who do not know TAREA, TAREA is a private association. It's an umbrella association that unites members who have joined voluntarily to network and also to tackle the challenges that are happening in the renewable energy sector, specifically renewable energy. And we have been in existence for 21 years now, and we have a membership base of around 922. And we are based in Tanzania, but we have members from Tanzania and also abroad, which gives us a network of stakeholders from different countries as well. And the network also hosts individuals, students, lecturers, companies, NGOs that are all working towards the growth and increased use of renewable energy technologies in the country. I leave it there for now.
Okay, thank you very much, Emma. And our second guest for today is Thabit Jacob. So maybe you also take this opportunity, Thabit, that you introduce yourself.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Good evening. So Thabit Jacob, I do research mostly on energy, mining, and oil and gas in Tanzania and Mozambique, and soon I'll be doing research in Ghana on those very topics. I was based in Denmark for a couple of years, but moved to Sweden, and now I'm at the University of Gothenburg in Sweden as a senior researcher. Thanks, and looking forward to the chat.
Thank you very much. Yeah, so this session is more or less going to be just an open discussion. We have a few questions, and maybe you feel free to react to whatever the other is saying. So I'll begin. Maybe we also have a few questions here that we'll be posing to you. Maybe I'll begin with Emma. Emma, for people who don't understand the energy sector in Tanzania, can you just maybe give a brief description of how it's set up? So what are the main sources, and yeah, what volumes are we talking about, or capacity are we talking about? Thank you.
Actually, for the energy sector in the country, we are having players from different angles. We have the government that is regulating, and when we talk of stakeholders, there are those that are coming from the private sector. There are those who are independent power producers, the small power producers, the mini grids. And technology-wise, we talk of petroleum, we talk of oil and gas, we talk of wind, natural gas with renewable energies, that is solar, wind, geothermal, although it's still under exploration, but it's taken on board. And also we talk of biomass because we cannot leave that behind. It's in the energy nexus of the country. And when we talk of these, we are talking of 48% of natural gas. We are talking of close to 31 from hydropower. And we have from petrol, it's around 18%. And 3% from others. That includes renewables and all the others that are not mentioned in that aspect. And in terms of installed capacity, we have around 1,605 megawatts installed in the country.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, based on the studies that you've provided, maybe I'll turn to you, Jacob. You see that one of the main sectors, one of the main sources of energy is the hydropower. How do you see this? I mean, we know the issues surrounding this aspect. How do you see, apart from dependent on a few sectors of energy, what do you think are other challenges facing the energy sector in Tanzania?
Yeah, so maybe before I get into that, maybe I just give a very brief background as to how we get into the numbers that Emma was sharing. So I think we have to go back around to 2011, 2012, where power was produced from mainly two sources. That was hydro and also thermal generation. And thermal here basically is power produced from oil-generated power, basically from what we call emergency power producers, EPPs. So those were like the two main dominant sources of power. And there's a lot of frustrations in Tanzania in the policy cycles and also on the streets, because blackouts were just recurring every year. So in the ministry at the time, the story was like, we can't keep on relying on hydro and thermal production for two reasons. Hydro, as we know, is very vulnerable to climate change and droughts. Thermal power at the time, so you're talking about 2011, 2012, this was a time when the price of oil was above $100 a barrel at the time. So the import bill as far as oil was concerned was huge. So the story was, let's get away from hydro and thermal because the climate change, you've got oil rising up. And the story around 2012, 2013, first of all, you've got Tanzania discovering huge natural gas deposit around 2011, which made Tanzania the Africa's second holder of natural gas deposit after Mozambique. So the story around 2011, 2012 was that we're going to move away from hydro and thermal production and focus more on natural gas and coal at the time. So I remember, Emma might remember this, at the time the Minister of Energy, Sospita Muhongo, was saying coal is going to be Tanzania's main source of energy alongside natural gas. And the story was, we're fed up with hydro, we're fed up with thermal power because it's too much import bill as far as oil is concerned, and then you've got climate change. But as we all know, things changed quite dramatically from 2015, 2016. And I think the question which maybe we need to discuss, and maybe Emma will have more to say on that than myself, is that, so Tanzania has what is called a power system master plan. This is kind of like a document, it's a national document which kind of set up the target, what kind of energy sources the country needs, what sort of investment the country should invest. The last one was developed around 2016, 2017, Emma, if I get it right.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, and there's targets on renewables were mentioned. So there were targets about producing a big chunk of energy from solar, from wind, and geothermal. But then 2016, the policy direction took a different direction when the new president arrived. So the story about moving away from hydro, all of a sudden we returned to hydro. We can discuss that a whole day about stigmas, and there's very little time to discuss more about that. But that's what I can say for now. But I don't know if I've responded well. But the story is like, big push to move away from hydro, then all of a sudden you're back to hydro. That's the storyline.
Yeah. But maybe just staying there, discussing about Stigler's coach or Julius Nyerere hydropower station. why do you think the focus has not been on solar? We know how many days of sunny days we have in a year in Tanzania. Why hasn't there been any focus on this? Because I know many countries, they have big solar stations or parks where they can generate a lot of power. Why hasn't there been enough to be done to foster this part of the renewable energy?
So if I could, so again, I think history here for the last 5 years is important. So when you talk about solar and wind, and mostly renewable powers, most of these are likely going to be developed by private players. So what we call IPPs, independent power producers.
Yeah.
So again, history is important. So Magufuli came into power at the end of 2015, 2016. And he was so skeptical about the private sector, extremely skeptical. And you could, part of his skepticism was part of what he inherited. So Magufuli came into power at the time when the energy sector was in the midst of all these corruption scandals. Those of you who've been following development in Tanzania, you'd remember the IPTL power scandal, which forced the former Prime Minister Edward Lowassa to resign.
Yeah.
So in Magufuli's vision, so some of you remember Magufuli was battling against mining companies. He was battling against energy companies. He thought the country was being cheated by IPPs, by international independent power producers. So he really didn't want anything to do with private sector. Yeah. And as a result of that, everything was tasked to do with TANESCO, which is our main national utility. And I guess, history will judge Magufuli the way he deserves, but some people will say that Magufuli, his skepticism was maybe justified, because it's true that the energy sector was a source of, corruption and mismanagement. So there's a fair share of truth in that. But, when it comes to energy, the government has to be pragmatic. The government has to know what it can do and what it can't do. There's so many things TANESCO can do. There are a lot of things that TANESCO cannot do.
Yeah.
And I think what Emma will say more on that is, I think what Emma and other players are doing is trying to make sure that, you try to supplement what the government does. And this is where I was in Denmark at the time. So I don't know if Emma, you've heard of the 100 megawatt Dodoma wind project, which was supposed to be developed by a Danish company called Vestas. Some of you guys in Germany will know Vestas.
They have a lot of wind parks here. Yeah.
Right. Vestas is the world's largest wind producer.
Yeah.
So they would try to invest 100 megawatt wind power in Dodoma. The Chinese consortium was trying to invest 100 megawatt in Singida, another wind project. So the key question here is, why you've got these investors who are willing to inject money and produce power to the grid, and the government was not giving them any chance to do that. I want to switch this to Emma. I have plenty to say, but I want to probably switch to Emma and see what she can say about that.
Yeah, I think maybe Emma, you can react to this, because my question was also going to be going that direction. My next question is, what role is privatization of the energy sector? So maybe being a relief for TANESCO, maybe the way forward. Maybe, but you can answer this to Thabit's question first.
Actually, not far from Thabit, I agree the previous times have been hard for the private sector. That includes us as well. And we have been struggling even to have dialogues between the public and private, just to address some of these key issues that maybe when we sit on the table could be discussed and resolved. But now, after that era, the Magufuli era, we are glad that even the Minister of Energy changed, because he was not a person that you could dialogue with any affair, especially when it came to the prices, the tariffs. We had hard times way back, but at least now we have a new regime, and the new minister opened the doors for the private sector to sit on the table and discuss, because we had a lot of challenges, including the tariff issues with the mini grid. I think that was popular all over the country. And even the private companies shied away. Most of them left the country, decided to sell their properties and their assets to the other local companies, just to move away from all these politics around the energy sector. And unfortunately for an umbrella association like that, like us, we tried hard to get discussions going on, but I think the times were not proper for that sort of discussion. And now that we are getting back, we had the chance to sit with the minister and discuss, and even the tariff issues are now being resolved. Unfortunately, some of the companies have already left the country, but the remaining ones, there's still hope, and there are a lot of discussions going on, and the current Minister of Energy and all the regime are giving a huge priority to these energy projects that were kind of stuck. So I'm sure even the Chinese that in the wind project and the Dodoma project for the wind are all happening. Actually, it's a good direction that we're heading now. Okay. And unfortunately, the energy sector has been highly affected by the politics around it, not anything close to technical, not anything on awareness. It's more of politics around it, and I would say the government interest, depending on who is at the top of the leadership, that dictated much of what happened in the previous times and what is currently happening now. And even the national utility, there had been issues with selling the electricity. There's pending discussions on the net metering, the feed-in tariff, just because of the previous regime. And I think when you have a leader who does not agree on private sector participation into the energy sector generally, it trickles down to all the utilities, all the agencies that are around it. Even the technical personnel cannot practice their expertise or advice accordingly, just because of who is driving the wheel at that time. But now we are seeing things flowing back to space. Even the discussions that happened end of last year opened a huge way for the private sector to come and invest. And we are glad that we are part of the discussions. And we have big hope that it's going to happen differently compared to the Magufuli times. Not sure, but we are hoping.
We are hoping. Okay.
Just to, if I can put some numbers on what Emma's just said, the private sector question. Yep. So you remember Emma gave us the numbers, because I think I should say that Tanzania is one of the lowest energy consumption in the world. Emma just gave you the number. I think the data from December last year, the total installed capacity is like 1,605 megawatts. Yeah. That's the entire country total electricity capacity. What is interesting is that 87% of that is power on the grid, what we call grid power. Yeah. Yeah. And then 13% is what we call off-grid. And over 90% of this is produced by TANESCO, the state-owned utility. And this is a utility, as Emma said, which has struggled with technical capacity, is struggling with debt, a huge chunk of debt. And you mentioned privatization. So I also have my own reservation about privatizing the power sector. And there are experiences elsewhere. We have seen Ghana has done it with some mixed results. Nigeria has done it, and the power system in Nigeria remains chaotic, absolutely chaotic, even with privatization. So Emma has talked about the minister, January Makamba, reaching out, which is true. He has also reached out to me, which is very unusual. Mm-hmm. So I think there's kind of hope that everybody agrees that Magufuli undermined investor confidence. And what do you do when you undermine investor confidence? Investment dries up. So I've not been to Tanzania since the new president came into power, but the stories I'm hearing is that things are, like Emma is saying, that things are slightly opening up. Mm-hmm. Maybe investments will return. But most important, when you have a minister who is really listening, reaching out. So I've been writing a lot mostly on Twitter. Patrick will know that I'm on Twitter. So I have been resisting complete privatization, but I've been saying we need to restructure TANESCO into 3 separate units. So you've got a unit that only does generation, another unit that does transmission, and another one that does retail and distribution. Because TANESCO is this monster that is so crowded and so inefficient. So I was just responding to your question about privatization. It's good, but it's not a silver bullet, if you like.
Yeah. I totally agree with you. The question also is splitting the issue of I think what you mentioned about this, the 3 units. We have something similar like this. If you look at the energy supply chain here in Germany, we also have something similar like this. The question is, does it still have to all the 3 units be belonging to TANESCO, or maybe you can also look at other competitors in this?
You could look, I mean, our neighbors, Kenya have done that. So if you look at Kenya, they have Kengen, which does generation.
Yeah, the generation,
they have Ketraco, which does transmission, and KPCL, which does retail. And what you have is again, it's a mix of public-private partnership. And I think, one thing about this, again, the Magufuli poison will last for many years. Because, Magufuli was, as I said, was super skeptical of the private sector. Was not a big fan of the private sector at all, because he thought the country was being swindled and being cheated. I can give one anecdote. I was sitting with one of the senior managers at EWURA. EWURA is the downstream energy regulator. And Magufuli's message was resonating with the common people, because he was basically saying we're being cheated by these private sector folks. They're basically messing up the country. And one of the concerns is that if TANESCO want to partner with a private player, you have to sign power purchasing agreement, right, Emma? And this is where government gets screwed. That's where African government really get cheated. But if you don't want to be cheated, you outsource expertise. So part of my other job, as I said, I do research in the oil and gas. We advise the national oil company, for instance, TPDC. In 2018, TPDC actually hired an international consultant to help them to negotiate with the international oil companies. So what I'm trying to say is basically is for the government to be pragmatic, not always being very anti-private sector. So what I'm hearing now is it looks like Samia Suluhu Hassan is being more pragmatic. I think she knows what she can do and what she cannot do and what others can do.
Okay.
I'll stop there for now.
Okay. Yeah, I think there's, like you said, also this is what you also hear in the media. Also, there's a lot of new wave in terms of possibilities for private investors. Yeah, maybe coming back to the point that you mentioned before, Emma, as well as Thabit, the issue of the feed-in tariffs. So in Germany, we have a system or a structure where we do not only look at of course, the independent power producers. We're not looking at the mini grid sources, but more of like private households where they have a possibility of saying, I have a solar panel in my house and I'm producing more than I require. So you're more or less making the consumers the producers. That's what they have the concept here. I'm trying to think. I've been looking at the feed-in tariffs that have been generated or that are being defined by EWURA, but mostly focusing on this other independent power producers. Do you think private households having feed-in tariffs for private households is also a way forward? Because we have so many we call them island solutions, where people have each household produces their own power for their own consumption, but normally what they produce is more than what they require. Would this be a solution to reduce the burden on TANESCO or probably the other power producers? Emma?
Actually, I would say it could be a way forward, but not now, because even the existing feed-in tariff right now, it's not working. Like, it's not being applied. It has not been able to show that it's a feasible solution to TANESCO, partly because of the maybe technical challenges with the utility, and on the other hand, the economics. Because if you do not have the means to justify things to them, and if they are not following up all the discussions, and I know some of them have been even taken to abroad for case studies and study tours just to see how other countries have been faring up, but still there's still that resistance. We have been working hard to convince them, to create awareness to them, to bring these other experts, because we have other members from abroad who can clarify this, because sometimes when you hear it from the neighbors, it's a bit clicking in their heads than hearing it from us, the private sector, the locals. But still, up to now, I would say it has not been able to work, but I see it's just a matter of understanding and technical aspects that have to be cleared out for these experts in the utility.
Okay. Yeah. So I think also what I also maybe Thabit can add on this. I think also the issue of the infrastructure. I was based on my personal experience. I was in a small village in Makete, where they have a lot of individual sources of power, where almost each household has a small panel in the house, but the national grid, because you're not connected to the national grid, makes it more difficult. So even if you want to feed into the national grid and you're not connected to it, I think it's also a big issue. So yeah.
Right. So I think that's perhaps the biggest challenge, I think, and very few people are talking about, especially the state of the national grid, but also the transmission line.
Yeah.
So, I mean, right now, people who don't get how the sector operates, people say, Tanzania has one of the lowest energy consumption. People are struggling to access energy. Emma, I don't know if you saw the recent government response when people were complaining about mgao, blackouts all the time. The government spokesman, this was very interesting. I think it was just a month ago. He was basically saying, we're now producing 1,600 megawatts of power, and the national demand is actually 1,200. So we have excess of 400 power on the grid. What are you complaining about? We're producing more than what we need. But the story is the transmission line, which I think in this case, TANESCO struggle a lot to communicate. So before we started this meeting, I was just looking at the news in Tanzania. The minister has just disbanded the TANESCO communication unit today, actually this afternoon.
Okay.
But what I'm trying to say is that just echo what you just said about the state of the Tanzanian transmission system is so old and so disorganized. I know the Swedes have been putting so much money. I think last year close to $55 million they sent to Tanzania to basically to improve the transmission line. And I think, if you don't improve the transmission line, you're going to have a situation where, again, because our power is so much, because one of the challenges I think is we're too reliant on the grid. We should be investing a lot off grid. You could finish Stigler's Gorge and produce 2,100 megawatts. You could finish Kinyare's 1, 2, 3, and 4 and produce so much power from natural gas. But if your transmission line is a mess, you still have people who are not connected. Right.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. I agree with you. I mean, this is the challenge that we have. But maybe based on this, so this probably goes to the next question to Emma. Recently, we had the issue of the connection, the electricity poles, where we had a big discussion in terms of the government saying if you want to have your household connected to the main grid, it will cost about 27,000 shillings. Then all of a sudden, we're talking about over 270,000. Shillings for the connection. So what's your take on this? Because we're talking about transmission, connection, off-grid, so we kind of feed into the national grid. But if I cannot connect my house because I have to pay 10 times more than what I should have been paid or what was communicated initially. So what's your take on this? And do you think it's just more of a discussion, a political issue that probably will be reversed in the near future?
Actually, what was happening was, I think there were more of incentives that made people discuss that, and it was not that really practical. But the statements that are being given now were also given by the very same person who is talking of them now, the rates that have been mentioned out of the 27,000 to the current figure that is being mentioned. Now, these things, when it's politics, it's hard to say if it's going to go back or it's still the statements, because soon we'll be going for the general election after the few years. Now you don't know what to expect, because even before the previous election, it was highlighted that by 2021, all villages will be electrified. And that was the way to go. And it was not talking of any other technology than the grid extension. And some of the companies, the private sector companies, were even issued the letters that even in this village we are coming, so you should see of ways to pack out or find the best way to operate with the grid or compete with it. So when it's politics, it's hard to guarantee anything, I would say.
Yeah.
If I can add into that just briefly, it's, politics is very much at the center of this, and CCM as a ruling party, proud itself on producing cheap power. That's what they campaign. I spend a lot of time reading CCM manifestos every election year, and when you get into those manifestos, there's all these huge promises of providing cheaper power. Some of you will remember Magufuli sacked the head of EWURA when EWURA introduced new tariff, right?
Yes.
Yeah, because these are very sensitive issues to CCM, and things are changing now, because I think, as Emma said, people were so surprised. This is the same Samia Suluhu Hassan, made this promise, and then she's making a U-turn. But the story people are not getting is because TANESCO is changing so much at the moment. So Emma, you'll know that TANESCO has a new board.
Yeah.
And the board has been given certain targets, and there's so much pressure for TANESCO to turn things around and become more profitable, because it's, if you look at the debt that TANESCO has, it's massive.
Huge. Yeah.
So there's a lot of pressure on TANESCO to become more profitable. So they're becoming a little bit desperate, and then that's why you saw this new rate that was introduced. It's because of this pressure that TANESCO is facing at the moment.
Okay, yeah. Maybe just to our viewers or listeners here, if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat. I have several questions, but also if you have any, then we can definitely look at them. Maybe just one that is coming, that based on the discussion that we have. Patrick is asking, can you elaborate on the proposal to invest more in the off-grid generation? So this could probably go to Emma first. Maybe Patrick. Yeah, sorry.
Maybe Thabit can go first in that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, like I said, there's a lot of push for off-grid power. If you look at the power system master plan, I think the language was basically, we acknowledge the state cannot do everything, and we need to invite other players to tap in and invest in off-grid power. But I gave you the numbers. So at the moment, you've got TANESCO very much in control. Big chunk of power is produced from TANESCO. Even the off-grid power, I think it's only, and Emma, you can correct me now, but I know it's only 5 megawatts, which is actually coming from the Kigoma.
Yeah, from solar.
Right, that's the only off-grid power that is produced by a different player. So if this language of things changing, Yana Samir, if this language that investor confidence is coming back, because to get a lot of this off-grid power, you need a lot of private players to come in, and there was no that space under Magufuli, for the reason that he was not a big fan of the private sector, as we all know. What I'm hearing is, I think Makamba has reached out to I've seen him talking to Danish ambassador, the Swedish ambassador, and I understand the Swedes and the Danish have been pushing a lot on this front, on off-grid power.
Mm-hmm.
Because the other thing we need to know again is the energy sector. You need a lot of, as I've said, a lot of investment from the private sector and also the donors. In the Magufuli time, the donors and the government were not in good terms, as we all know. It looks like there's that window to kind of, have this dialogue again. So, Patrick, I don't want to promise much, but from what I'm hearing, it looks like some of these projects, some of them got stalled under Magufuli, some of them might be revived.
Okay. Yeah. Anything to add on, Emma? Or?
But also with the solar projects, the small solar off-grid connections for the household. I've seen some other persons commenting. The problem is that these figures, sometimes they are brought up politically. Unfortunately, some of these are quite not realistic. It depends on to whom they are sent to. So you can find what is actually documented from solar. It's not everything. It's not counting each household that has a solar panel on top or all of the mini grids that are sitting, how much have been contributing to electrification. So it's always hard to say that these figures are conclusive, but at least these are what exists in the government system, and we have to live with them as they are, because these are also mandated to provide such data. You cannot come up and say this is not true, this is true. But we know that there are some deficiencies in the data collections for the renewable energy technologies.
Right.
I guess
it goes to this question here. Somebody's asking, is Michael says?
Yes, exactly. I think that's what Emma was also answering, that you don't really have reliable statistics that where you can really say that this is from national grid. But unless you have anything to add on, Jeff.
Yeah, just to add. First of all, I completely agree with Emma. You know, for the last 5 years, people like us doing research, you know, life has been a nightmare because, you know, Tanzania passed a law basically criminalizing anybody critiquing national statistics. So the national statistics, you have to believe them as the Bible or the Quran. So Emma is very much right. You know, anything comes from the government is official, and if you disagree, you're likely going to end up in jail. So that's very unfortunate. But there's one thing I want to mention here. So we don't know the numbers, but and I think Emma again will know here better than myself. What I understand, I'm always very impressed because I do research in the countryside. So I travel a lot in rural areas. You know, you've mentioned Makete, I've been to Njombe, Mtwara, Mbinga, a big football fan. You know, sometimes I'm in the middle of nowhere, but I will always watch football because of solar power. So this, you know, it's always nice to see. But what I understand is that I think TAREA, the Tanzania Revenue Authority, does impose some heavy import duty on some of the solar panels, connection cables, and maybe Emma will know this better than me. And when I was there and I talked to a few players, and people were saying the appetite for solar, off-grid solar, is huge, but this import tariff from TAREA is putting people off. And you know, these are policy issues, I think, which, you know, perhaps, because I understand TAREA does advocacy as well, maybe you can rise with the ministry and perhaps try to address.
Yeah, it's true. The scenarios are a bit varying. Sometimes, you know, the technology has been promoted for a number of years, and we know the government gives these incentives to increase the uptake of the technologies, as it is always stated when we are advocating for tax relief or VAT exemptions or import duty. And now whenever we have certain discussions to do with taxes, it's always counting back. Like since this year, we were talking of low use, low uptake and the like. But currently we see there are households that are connected to that are installed by solar. Almost in all the villages that you visit, you see their solar panels. So this is not quite a new technology, and it has grown, it has kind of matured. And they're always talking of taking back removing the exemptions, although it has not been passed. So from these private players, whenever they have to go to the ports, to the harbor to clear their goods, there's always that resistance, like this is not a new technology, this is a technology, this is exempted, this is not exempted. That if you are not sure of what exactly is exempted, you might fall into the trap that they are being taxed, even the import duty and the VAT exemption. But as much as I know, the VAT exemptions are still applied to solar technology, especially the panels, the inverters, the chargers. But import duty is something that is in the region, not in a specific country. East Africa, all of them, if there is import duty exemption, it applies to all the East African countries. But if it's VAT, it stands for the country alone. So for the VAT, I know they are still exempting, unless there are few cases that are being observed, and these companies have to find the right channel to get that incentive.
Okay. Maybe before I go to this question that I'll direct towards Thabit, just sticking to that point, Emma, you've mentioned about tax exemptions, probably some kind of incentives. I've been looking at a company called Mobiso, where they have a very interesting business concept, and which has been quite successful in many countries around East Africa. What else needs to be done in terms of to develop the the energy sector from TAREA perspective, I would say, apart from the tax exemptions and yeah.
I think even for Mobisol, it's a matter of a business model. It's not only the exemptions. Some of these companies have developed different models that have been working quite well. And to our side, we see, since it's always hard to get the exemptions, we would advise for best or better business models that are new to the country, that are being applied elsewhere, so that we can also work towards promoting that business model and finding always a way out of the expensiveness of the technology. That's what we are promoting, because you cannot go to the same government asking for VAT exemptions for the previous 20 years that you're in existence and you're still claiming that technology has not matured. It would not be easy. And also nowadays, when you go to the government, it is always talking of collecting revenues. So when you go for such incentives, you have to have a better case to discuss, not the old same case.
Same cases, okay, yeah. Then I'll just go to this question. I think the first part is more interesting. From what I know, hydroelectric power is among the important way to avoid environmental destruction. So why does it seem to be destructive? Maybe from the scientific part of it, maybe you can answer to this Thabit. And then, of course, the second part of the question is more political. I think in the interest of time, I'll probably leave it there. Yeah, so maybe you can just answer the first part of the question.
Yeah, so I think it has to do with the Stiglitz coach. Why is kind of Magufuli portrayed as a villain in this project, and while he's claiming that he's celebrated by the rest, which I'm not sure about that. But so I think the story about the dam is that, first of all, for those who've been following development closely, is that, I remember I gave the context about the story about moving away from hydro to thermal and very much focusing on coal and natural gas. Yeah. So Tanzania built this huge pipeline from TAREA to Dar es Salaam. This was the Kikwete government. And the government borrowed $1.2 billion from China to do that project. And the idea was to take the gas from the southern part of the country to Dar es Salaam and produce more power from natural gas. So, I mean, even within government, so criticism was coming when the proposal to build the dam came, even within government, people were saying like, this is bonkers, this is crazy, why would you do this? So the most critical comments came from what we call the CAG, the Chief Auditor General. I'm sure you know that office.
Yeah. So
the CAG is the guy who does audit government books and government projects.
Actually, Mr. Assad, Dr. Assad.
Yeah, and you know how he ended up losing his job in a very controversial way, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
So Professor Assad produced his report, and one of the key findings was that the pipeline, which we borrowed money, $1.2 billion, was only used at 4%. It was 96% inefficient. So what does that mean? Basically, it means that you have a lot of natural gas. You could use the gas and use the pipeline to produce more power. You don't need to go and produce this dam. Again, the thing about mega dams are portrayed as clean. One thing about hydropower is seen as renewable. We should know that. It's actually categorized as renewable.
Yeah.
Right? So there's a temptation in the energy sector to classify hydro as clean and efficient. But if you look at the production cycle of producing hydropower, it's not as clean, it's not as environmental friendly as people claim. We all know what happened in Rufiji, the amount of trees that were cleared to pave way for the dam.
Yeah.
And then because this was a project that was environmentally disastrous. Any international bank was ready to finance it. So Magufuli was struggling to finance this project. And now a lot of I think it's 6.5 trillion shillings. Most of that money is coming from Tanzania. But even companies were resisting to build the dam. So what did the government do? The government went to Egypt and invited a very inexperienced Egyptian company called El Sawed. This is a company that has no history of dam building.
Yeah.
So if you ask me from a technical scientific point of view, I'll tell you, I am more concerned about the technical aspect of the project, even if it gets completed. Those who are in Tanzania will know there's a story in 2019 of floods in Rufiji, which actually affected people downstream. This was not a big news because at the time the media was muzzled. You know, the media could not report this. You'll be in a lot of trouble to do that. Why Magufuli was so popular in this dam? There's one story which has not been told by many. This is the dam that Nyerere tried to build 3 times and failed in the late 70s and 80s. And Magufuli was basically trying to send a message: I can pull this off. This is something that the founding father of the nation couldn't do it. I can do it. So this kind of messaging was resonating with people, you know, something that Nyerere couldn't do it, I'm able to do it, and producing so much power, more than what we need, and we're going to be exporting power. Yeah. That kind of message was so popular, but I mean, we can have this conversation a whole day.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. Yeah, I think this for me sounds like the same, similar to the Jinping mega hydropower project in China, of course, where they had something similar. Yeah. In the interest of time, I'll just give you 2 questions. I think the first one will go to Emma. So Emma, what would you like to see needs to be done so that we can achieve a more sustainable solution in terms of the power supply and availability in Tanzania? What just maybe a final remark from your side?
Actually, in 5 years' time, I would say maybe the government would start. It's high time it starts inviting all the players, not necessarily itself extending the grid to rural remote areas. It's going to be actually expensive, and it's not going to be efficient. And let alone even the remote areas, actually, they don't need all that. They would need just a solar panel, like just electricity for the household and a small business, a small shop. That would be enough for them. Not everyone needs that grid extended to his or her village to get the necessary economic development. So we would be happy to see the energy mix actually happening in a way that all the players from private, from the other institutions, because we have religious institutions that are doing a huge projects in the rural remote areas, and it's working quite well, and they're electrifying the communities, and it's a small village in its own, and it's growing slowly as it wants. So I think in the 5 years' time, I think the Tanzanian energy mix composition has to have more of renewables, more of other players taking on board, and not necessarily extending the grid, because it's getting expensive, and we have had the national debt for the utility TANESCO is increasing instead of decreasing, despite the number of years that it has been operating. So this is not something to encourage.
So you're calling for, first of all, a dialogue between the stakeholders, not just the government, but also the stakeholders involved in this. We're talking about private households, organizations like TAREA, private investors. Yeah, which would be a good start. I know some initiatives have been done, but I think this has to be done on a continuous basis. And Thabit, maybe a question to you. You mentioned at the beginning that a minister contacted you in terms of this to discuss about the energy issue. So my question would be, what role do you think the diaspora, the Tanzanian diaspora, should play in terms of, or will play in terms of probably creating a better energy mix and providing a more sustainable solution? So what do you think your role as a diaspora would be, or should be, or for me as a diaspora as well, should be in terms of solving this, tackling this huge problem that we have, or challenge that we have?
Yeah. Before I get into that, I'll just add just to what Emma said. Opportunities in the renewable sectors are immense. Tanzania prided itself on natural gas and coal. Coal is now increasingly becoming a stranded asset. Natural gas is still very important, but these are very strange times for fossil fuel. So Tanzania has the opportunity to become, the new solar powerhouse, if you like, the new powerhouse in terms of renewables. but well, you know, I don't really see myself even as a diaspora. I am so connected to Tanzania. I'm so in touch. I just see myself as one of Tanzanians. But I suppose I think that the diaspora can play a big role in, you know, in whatever you do. I mean, I do research. The reason I say it was quite awkward to see the minister reaching out to me is because I was very critical of the government, and I was you know, branded as probably the enemy of the state at some point. So to have a minister reaching out to me was quite strange in a good way. But I mean, I was very open to the minister that, you know, because I'm in touch with people at TPC and Aura, and you know, whatever you do, I'm Tanzanian first. So, you know, whatever you can help, you provide your technical expertise, and I think that's what the diaspora should do. You know, try to help where we think we can help and where we think that there's space for you to do that. And I think this is a shame, because this is what was lacking in the last 5 years. You know, the diaspora, we're seen as part of the Mabeberu, as you know, the Mabeberu narrative. You know, the president was famous for this. You know, he was always looking at Tanzania versus the world, us against them. You know, Tanzanian versus imperialists, Tanzania versus Mabeberu, and some of the diaspora we are seen as part of the Mabeberu class, if you like. But we are not Mabeberu. You know, we're very much Tanzanians. And I think sometimes you don't have to wait for you to be consulted by the government. If you think you know certain private players in Germany who are working in the energy space, you want to connect them to Tanzania, do that if you can. So I think everybody has a role to play. I am playing mine, although now I'll be doing research in Ghana, but I still have good contact in Tanzania. I promise the minister I'll be there to help when needed. Yeah.
Good.
So.
Okay. Yes. Thank you very much. I think that's what we all need. I think provide the support that they need in terms of solutions, technical. I think the connection that we have in the country that we're living here as diaspora, I think it's a huge thing. And a small suggestion. She mentioned Morocco as being a pioneer or being a leader in the renewable energy in Africa, mainly with solar. So I think this is something that we can take up as well. How we can look on. I think this is what we need to look. We don't need to define completely new solutions, but just look at around our neighbors and other African countries, what they have done. I think it's
right. You just mentioned Kenya. You know, Kenya now produces around 800 megawatts from geothermal power. We have huge geothermal potential in Manyara, in Bear, but we're producing zero at the moment. So you're right. And I agree, Morocco, a good example, very success story. But we just have to look at the neighbor across the border in Kenya. Remarkable stuff.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Okay, so thank you very much, Emma, for your time. Thank you very much, Thabit, for your time. For me, it was a very interesting discussion. So thank you very much, and have a good evening, everyone. Thank you.